Maleficent has been one of Disney's biggest and most popular villains since the creation of her character in 1959, despite most fans not knowing much about her backstory. However, thanks to all of the love that the character has received from fans, Disney has created multiple projects that acted as a deeper dive into the character's life. And because of Mistress of All Evil, A Tale of the Dark Fairy, a novel by Serena Valentino, fans were given insight into what really shaped Maleficent into the dark fairy everyone knows her to be. And it looks like a lot of it is actually quite relatable and stems back to something that almost everyone was subjected to at one point or another in their lives: bullying. They say looks aren't everything, but that's clearly not the case in the world of Disney, where being the fairest of them all was truly a way to get ahead for everyone except for Maleficent. Despite the beauty that the dark fairy was described as having after she came of age, she was still treated terribly by the other fairies around her because she still looked different from the rest of them. And the truly shameful thing is that, according to Mistress of All Evil by Serena Valentino, all of that superficial bullying began right after Maleficent was born. Though it's never explained or even really hinted at exactly who Maleficent's birth parents were in the book, it's clear that they didn't care for their daughter. They didn't even take the time to raise her for themselves, and instead, they left her in a crow's tree with likely no indication that she would actually survive. Luckily for the future Mistress of Evil, she was able to survive and was likely raised by the same murder of crows that she was left with. That being said, according to Serena's novel, the crow's tree that Maleficent grew up in was located within fairyland, implying that one of the many fairies could have taken her in as her own. But none did, not at first anyways. As the book showed, Maleficent was the victim of bullying practically since her birth, simply because she looked different, because she had a pair of horns that none of the other fairies had. Those around her treated her like she was born evil, and they did their best to stay away from her, as if she had the plague. And this went on for the first 4 years of the dark fairy's life. That's right, not only did Maleficent survive being raised in a tree by crows until she was 4 years old, she did so without any help from others. Her only family up until that point were the crows. It's a good thing for Maleficent that everything changed for her after she met the One of Legends, a character that has been mentioned in a few of the Disney villains novels by Valentino, was a powerful fairy that was simply referred to as Nanny, and in Mistress of All Evil, A Tale of the Dark Fairy, she played her biggest role yet. And though it was a good thing for Maleficent, it sadly didn't stop the future villain from facing a life filled with bullies and misjudgment. Nanny came across Maleficent when the child was only 4 years old, and after she saw the state that the girl in the crow's tree was in, the powerful fairy did the only thing she could think of. She took Maleficent in as if she were her own flesh and blood. This is when Valentino's novel explained the true origin of Maleficent's name. At first, when she met Nanny, the young fairy was unable to speak, but thanks to a bit of magic and some help from her new mother, Maleficent learned to talk. And the first words out of her mouth were, "They call me Maleficent." Nanny was depicted as being very intelligent in the book, and she understood right away why the other fairies chose such a vile name for the girl. You see, in astrology, the planets Mars and Saturn are 2 out of 4 planets referred to as malefics, with people believing that Mars is a lesser form of evil and Saturn is the worst. And according to Mistress of All Evil, Maleficent's name is derived from this evil grouping of planets, and the fairies began to call her this specifically because they thought the child looked that way, evil. And that's truly heartbreaking, because it means even Maleficent's name was a form of bullying that she endured during her life. After moving into Nanny's house, Maleficent was treated better than she ever had been, and she began to learn how to use magic, though this only kept her away from the bullies until school started. In Mistress of All Evil, Valentino explained that not only was Nanny a powerful fairy, but she was actually the head mistress of the Fairy Academy. Picture Hogwarts, but all Disney-fied, and that's basically how the academy was described. All in all, it seemed like a really cool place to go, though it would pay to go at a different period in time, because Maleficent's grade was full of divas that were truly mean for no reason. In fact, some of the characters who bullied Maleficent the most were actually characters that Disney originally portrayed as good guys. In Valentino's book, readers were likely pleased by the appearance of the 3 supposedly good fairies from Sleeping Beauty: Fauna, Flora, and Merryweather. However, their pleasant charade was cast aside as their true colors bled through while they were attending the academy with Maleficent. Sadly, this would result in one of the toughest times of the dark fairy's life, as she was subjected to one of the worst forms of bullying just because of Maleficent's outward appearance, specifically the horns on her head. Most of her classmates formed a prejudicial opinion of her, one that was preyed upon by the 3 fairies in Serena's novel. There was even a point in the book where Fauna specifically asked their teacher, who happened to be Cinderella's fairy godmother, if she could force Maleficent to hide her horns. And believe it or not, fairy godmother agreed with her student that Maleficent's horns made the other fairies uncomfortable, and the teacher was even bold enough to tell the future dark fairy to cover up. This was only one of the times in the novel that Cinderella's fairy godmother was shown as less than righteous, but there will be more on her soon. Just imagine how a young Maleficent felt, being told that something that she had no control over, her horns, was bothering the other students, and that she had to hide them because they made her different. School was already a tough place for most kids when it comes to bullying. The last thing any student needs is the teacher getting involved and siding with the bullies. Even though Maleficent was taken in by Nanny, who loved her, it seemed that she couldn't escape the constant torment that she faced from most, if not all, of the other fairies. Following Fauna's complaint and fairy godmother's compliance, it seemed that the only person who would stick up for Maleficent was her adoptive mother. According to the book, Nanny, the headmistress, burst into the room as if she knew her daughter was being ridiculed and made a speech about how the others needed to accept Maleficent. And while it was a kind gesture from Nanny, anyone who went to school will tell you that public parental involvement only adds to the ridicule. And that is exactly what happened with Maleficent. In the novel, Serena explained that as soon as Nanny left the classroom, Maleficent felt embarrassed, and her classmates only made fun of her more and more until eventually it was just too much for the young fairy to handle. Maleficent was so upset by the bullying that she teleported away from the school and back to her treehouse, which was when Nanny realized that the academy wasn't the right place for her. And though that decision kept Maleficent away from those who were bullying her, the sanctuary would only last for so long. Over the next couple of years, Maleficent would grow into a beautiful young fairy, though she was still targeted for her minor differences when compared to the rest of the fairies. You see in the book Mistress of All Evil, after Nanny took Maleficent out of the academy, she trained her to use magic on her own, and the young fairy proved to be quite powerful. And on the date of her 16th birthday, Maleficent decided that she wanted to take the fairy tryout exam, which the reluctant Nanny allowed. Now, Maleficent likely didn't even consider the fact that her exam would line up with her former fellow students, which meant she was once again face to face with the same people who bullied her relentlessly, though they had to wait until after their test to bully the future villain. During the exam, the book explained that the fairy godmother created scenarios for each fairy in order to test them and make sure they were ready to look after a person in need. Interestingly enough, Maleficent was tasked with saving Snow White from the wickedness of the evil queen. Maleficent passed her exam with flying colors, though no one would acknowledge that fact after she was once again targeted by her childhood bullies. Fauna, Flora, and Merryweather were the last ones to finish their exams, according to Valentino's book, and instead of blaming themselves for their failure, they tried to pin it on Maleficent. The trio once again ganged up on Maleficent and began to bully her as Nanny and Fairy Godmother argued amongst themselves. And though good news was about to come her way, Valentino continued to remind the audience that Maleficent was always going to be subjected to bullying and prejudice by her own kind. At that point in Mistress of All Evil, Nanny debated with Godmother on whether or not Maleficent and the others deserved to be granted wishing status and assigned someone for them to look after. While Fairy Godmother was against it, Nanny argued about how well Maleficent and the others did and even said, "You know as well as I that the fairies that should be granted wishing status are Maleficent, the Blue Fairy, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather." And although Fairy Godmother complied and granted all of them, including Maleficent, wishing status, it didn't come without harsh words. According to the author, as she granted Maleficent her wishing status, Fairy Godmother also took the chance to tell the young fairy that she was meant to be evil no matter what. And sadly enough, this was the last straw for the Dark Fairy, and all of the relentless bullyings had finally been enough. In her fury, Maleficent turned into her dragon form and went on a rampage that was the true beginning of her life as the Mistress of All Evil. Do you think that if the other fairies had been nicer to Maleficent, she would have been able to resist her villainous intentions? Make sure you let us know in the comments down below.